Who are
Hi
you?
there. My name is Christoph von Toggenburg. I'm from Switzerland, and I've been a person who's been his entire life very curious and very driven by the passion of actually making a change to people's lives. And this has really guided my life, I would say, for the last 25 years at least. And I always felt that for myself, that if I want to help people, I want to do it in a way that I have fun and that I feel like it benefits to me, but it benefits equally to the others. So it's almost like as if I was feeling like I want to share my energies with others because I have so much energy that I just have it to waste.
You have won a lot of awards. Could you tell us about some of them, the ones that you're most proud of?
Um, yeah, it's always difficult, I think, to talk about awards because it always sounds a bit self-promoting, but
But
it
you've been
is.
asked the question, so there's your excuse.
It's no, it's quite interesting. I mean, I've won over the last 20 years big awards for one my humanitarian work. For example, I received the Commander's Cross, the which is one of the highest decorations given to people on humanitarian grounds. Um, I I received most recently in the last 3 years my recent documentary about one of my big humanitarian projects received more than 40 international film awards, including the London Film Awards, the Barcelona Film Awards. And over the years, I received other awards, particularly for my humanitarian work. And I think it was always, I was always very humbled and very proud of receiving these awards. I never expected them. They were a very nice bonus, but I'm also not the kind of person who puts them much out. Usually I receive those awards, they're a nice medal or something, and then they end up in a drawer, and most of the time that's where they stay.
What are you most proud of? You've worked a lot in conflict resolution as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I worked more than a decade in conflicts all over the world for different international humanitarian organizations. And amongst those, I part of my role was to negotiate with different governments, rebel groups, etc., whoever is active in the conflict. And I think what makes me proud is, to some extent, I always manage to create a win-win situation for everyone. And I think that's one of the key elements of successful negotiations is the fact that I could manage to meet people, meet, for example, rebels. Let's say like I met the Talibans, I met the FARC rebels in Colombia, and I would always see the human side in them. And that opened many doors and often led to the fact that I managed to have hostages released or stop torture, all kinds of different things to improve actually the lives of the most vulnerable.
You moved from this type of work to the World Economic Forum, and whilst we're not going to go into an enormous amount of detail about your work there, could you just broadly tell us about your responsibility there?
I'm at the World Economic Forum. I'm wearing three hats, in fact. One is I'm a global leadership fellow. So the World Economic Forum selects every year about 20 individuals from around the world, which go through a 3 year training and master program at the World Economic Forum. Then my second hat is I'm the head of the foundations for Africa and MENA regions. And my hat number three is that I'm the co-manager of what is called the Global Future Council on the Humanitarian System. So it's a group of leading experts and CEOs and heads of international organizations from around the world who work together on trying to look at finding better solutions in the next 5 to 10 years for humanitarian responses around the world.
And you have been working, I believe, at the World Economic Forum for 2 years. but you have been running a foundation called Colour the World for the last 13 years. Could you tell us about the series of events that led to you establishing this foundation and what motivates you?
So Colour the World in many ways was almost one of those things that you're falling into. I've been my entire life always surprised about how one event follows another one, and you just sometimes are thrown into things that you cannot roll back from. So Colour the World was the result actually of one of my biggest humanitarian expeditions, which was Bike for Help, when I cycled from India to Switzerland. 10,000 kilometers alone across war zones and deserts, and so lots and lots of troubles. But I did that project at the time to raise funds and awareness for people affected by leprosy, by the disease leprosy. And what was incredible for me is this had started as a small student idea in my head at some point when I was studying in London. And living in this tiny, for anybody who's a student in London, he knows you live in tiny little rooms where you can barely afford anything. And so this small idea suddenly, over a year of preparation, grew to a big international project. And it grew so much that at the end, Bike for Help had global media coverage, 2 films were made about it, a book was written about it. It was incredible, and donations for leprosy patients came from all over the world. And it all reached such a dimension that at some point I realized I have to bring this a step further. This can't just end at this project. And so it led me to create the Colour the World Foundation, which until today serves and helps leprosy patients. And now since a few years, we also help a lot of women who have mental disabilities and who are abandoned in the streets.
Can I ask you why you chose those 2 issues to support? First of all, leprosy. I mean, there's a cure. There isn't necessarily a cure for leprosy, but leprosy as a disease has been wiped out in most areas of the world.
Yeah, that is correct. I chose leprosy because leprosy is one of those diseases that does still exist, and the problem is it's a disease that goes way beyond of what we see or what you can cure. Yes, you can cure the disease once it breaks out, but it's attached with a massive social stigma. So people are normally physically marked. I mean, they either, they lose limbs or they lose an ear or a nose or something. So people always know that these people have or had leprosy.
So it impacts them before the process can be stopped.
Exactly. Very often that is the case, and it's very important to give these people a voice, because once they're healed, there is nothing negative about them. It's just the fact that they're a sign. But I think in all the causes that I was looking for, and it's the same with those mentally destitute women, is things that are not necessarily pretty to look at, things that are difficult. I mean, it's much more. I mean, all causes are equally worthy, but it's easier, for example, if you do something for children, and it's difficult, very unwanted topic in many ways. And I'm always thinking back to one of the leprosy patients when I came to Cambodia and I visited one of the leprosy clinics. And there was a lady there, and we sat there and I was just telling her about the story and about how we're going to help the hospital and all of that. And then she said, you come all the way from Switzerland to help me that I have leprosy and my entire family has abandoned me. And it does make me feel important, and I think that's the whole secret behind it. You make people feel important who normally wouldn't consider themselves important.
I think that interview or the talk, the story is relayed on one of the videos that you produce, your award-winning videos.
Yes, I think it is on one of the one of the videos that have gone out because it was 6 years ago. I worked on a big national awareness campaign in India for these mentally destitute women and leprosy patients. And it was incredibly powerful what you can do with just a little bit of video. And just actually, again, giving these people a voice. And I think that's a bit the philosophy of all of what I did all my life is give a voice to those who have no voice. Because they...
Will you be adding more charities to your roster? Because you have a foundation which raises money and awareness for other charities. Will you be adding further charities to the list that you support?
That is, I mean, to add other charities, it's not an impossibility. It's more a question sometimes of capacity, and it's also a question of trust. I mean, the organizations I work with are very deeply rooted in what they do. They're very local based, which I like a lot because it's really about capacity building.
And most of them are in South India, I believe.
For the mentally destitute women, yes, they're in South India. But we recently started also to work with leprosy patients, for example, in Nepal, where you also still have quite a lot of them, and where we have taken a different path, where we do, for example, a lot of capacity building. We have sent those patients to a hotel school, for example, to learn to work in the tourism industry.
And have you done any work in Cambodia?
Yes, we have been working in Cambodia as well, because it's also one of those countries where there's quite a high rate of leprosy. It's a disease that is always related to poverty, very poor hygienic situations, but it's often extremely deep rural communities that are affected by the disease. And Cambodia is one of those countries where still very isolated communities live, and leprosy sort of is spreading amongst those communities. However, the situation is definitely improving. The problem is very often is, okay, you can cure those people, but that doesn't always mean that they can just go back into society. Yeah. So a big part of the work that the foundation is doing is actually helping to reintegrate those people.
So you're doing amazing things. You've raised hundreds of thousands of euros through your foundation. If people watching this, CEOs of large organizations with big budgets that they would like to put into social responsibility initiatives, how do they get in contact with you? How can they help you? What do you need from them other than straight funding? Where will that funding go?
So there's different types. I mean, the way Color the World is constructed is, in a sense, I mean, it is one of those organizations, and the way I built it was that companies, for example, give in-kind donations. Yeah, so Hewlett-Packard, for example, the computers, PricewaterhouseCoopers provides us with all the accounting and the monitoring, etc. So. And then we have legal services and all of that, and everybody contributes something. But very often also what happens is large donors come up to us and say, I have this and this amount and I would like to invest that in a project. So, for example, we recently helped to finance a village for incurable leprosy patients. Yeah, so that was one of those big projects, and of course these require a specific amount of money to actually come to realization. I think the good part is always, one, Color the World runs for free. That was one of the big goals of the way the foundation was built, is we have no admin costs. Whoever helps or works does that for free. And that will also remain that way. So we don't want to create any confusion between what people give and what gets where it's needed.
So where will the funds go, do you think? Excuse me. Let's say if you get a Bill Gates who says, okay, here's $1 million. Where will it go? Where do you need it most?
I mean, there's many regions where it's needed most, but I would say, I give you just two small examples. Yeah, one of those examples. I mean, we ran this test now with those students these leprosy students who were sent to the hotel school. It's a brilliant program. It's real capacity building. Long term, it really empowers those people. These are programs where I personally would like to invest a lot more because it's very long term looking. I think there's two things to look at. I think one is capacity building, is really helping those communities. Mm-hmm. The other thing is find a possibility for those who are really at the edge. As I was mentioning before, the incurable diseases, people that are so heavily affected by the disease that that you cannot really reintegrate them. And that's the important part to help as well. So I think it is both. You help the young to really get out of that, try a new life, but you help those who are most heavily affected because nobody else will help them.
You gave a great TEDx Zurich talk in which you wheeled your bicycle on stage. And one of the key messages was to encourage people who are good at certain things, who enjoy certain things, to use those skills to help people in need. I was just wondering whether you were a fan of the author Charles Ledbetter, whose he wrote a book called We Think, and the sort of central thinking within the book is that increasingly, as human beings, we want to be less defined by what we own and what we do as a profession, and more defined by what we share. And we're moving towards this. We are, or you are what you share.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful philosophy, and I think at the end, for me, it's always been happiness, in a sense. I think it made me, using the bicycle, I mean, I always used it as a tool the same way I use my camera as a tool because it helps me to communicate certain messages. And I think the bicycle was for me just a messenger. And it was interesting because after all my big expeditions and most recently when I cycled across the Himalayas, was that people always saw the cyclist in me. But at the end, what I'm always trying to explain to people is the bicycle is for me purely a tool that I'm using to get a message across. But it's also a beautiful way to look at the world. There's a whole philosophy that I have behind that.
Yes, that you are human. You're like everybody else. You're not an observer. You're doing what they're doing to get from A to B. Well, that's how I understood it anyway.
Yeah, the simple thing is you use something that everybody else is using. A bicycle, for example, is a means of transportation used everywhere. Even the poorest people use bicycles to get from A to B, you know. And in most countries, that's the only way actually to move around. And so I found it a very beautiful way of actually not only traveling and staying fit, but also actually really being in touch with people because you are at their level in many ways. I mean, most countries that I cycle through, if I would come up with a big, you know, like a Jeep, like SUV that many people have here, I mean, I would just be riding in a tank. I would detach myself completely from all these people.
So you love meeting people. Who in the world, out of everybody you could meet, would you like to meet if you were given the opportunity? And what would you like to ask them?
Yeah, I think one of those people, and I actually met him very briefly, but it's the Dalai Lama. And I'm always amazed, having worked so many years in conflicts, I'm always amazed how people can forgive and still laugh with an incredible laughter and a sense of humor. And forgive and move on. I think that's one of those key messages for me that I find incredibly powerful because I find so many people have don't have that capacity, and it makes just a drama move on instead of actually passing the drama and and opening brand new doors. And I think that's what really strikes me with him and his way of just simply touching everyone in the world.
And what would you like to ask him?
I think I would like to ask him, what's the biggest secret of forgiveness, actually?
Are you good at forgiving and moving on?
I think I'm very good at forgiving, and I think I've learned this increasingly over time, because you always realize that it doesn't make any sense to carry around anger, and very often, and this is a bit the learning from conflict, is there's always two points of view to a situation. And it's very important to listen to the other. I often, in negotiations, the very first thing I did in the first 15, 20 minutes, just give time to the other person to debrief. And very often, these were incredibly emotional debriefings, very angry often, but I felt that the person needed that. And suddenly, once that had passed, new doors opened, and we managed to, move on, because both felt respected.
Going into a situation like that, have you ever gone in with, I don't know, opinion A, and then listened to somebody and come out with a completely different opinion, or perspective, maybe is the best way of putting it?
Yeah, there have been many situations where I basically came out with a different opinion. And I think the important part for me was from the beginning is to show a certain openness. I think that's the hard part sometimes, is to be able to actually have the opinion changed. And I had many situations, for example, in various conflicts. I remember, when these are terrorists, and these are bad people, and there might be a perception of someone, and also not to say that people haven't done bad things, but at the end, I'm sitting there, and it's also a human being, and often with incredibly dramatic stories. And I'm walking out, and at least the thing that has changed, maybe I do not agree with what they're fighting for or what they're doing, but at least I have understood more who they are, and their humanity to some extent, what makes them human, and I found that really mind-boggling, particularly when you start dealing on a one-to-one basis with people that other people would just read about in the news, and most of the time very negatively.
Are you political?
That's a good question. I think I'm very apolitical, for the very simple reason. I've never found a party, I think, that would satisfy everything that I think about the world. So I would have a hard time to tie myself to any view of a party, for example. And I'm extremely free in my mind, and in my just my being. I feel like I would restrain myself.
So there is no political party that fits your thinking. What is your central philosophy?
Yeah, my central philosophy goes a lot about, live, love, and go crazy. In fact, I think it's a lot about breaking the norms, and do no harm. I think that's one of the key things. Is I find it important, no matter what I do in my life, I don't want to do harm to other people, On the contrary, I really want to leave something behind. Um, and I think it's a lot about legacy in many ways too. I think you do things that are way bigger than you are, but I often realize I have so much energy and I just want to give that away. Um, and I had a choice. You know, you have always a choice, and I had a choice. I mean, what do I do with all this energy? I could also do negative things with it, but it's a brilliant source of doing things that I have fun with and other people profit from.
If in 100 years' time somebody is walking past a plaque which describes the way you led your life, what you did in your village, is it Bucha?
No, I grew up in different villages, but one
I
is
see.
called.
I thought the village in Switzerland was Buche. How do you pronounce that?
Buchs, Books.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Books.
Yeah.
But if there was a plaque put up, what would you like it to say about you?
Somehow I would like to, I don't know, I would like it to say he never gave up, you know. I think it's, I often think about this when when I crossed all these crazy deserts and war zones and whatever, and my thing was always never give up, you know. Also because there's people that are so much worse off. I mean, in this moment, everything that I would go through is just nothing compared to what most people have to endure every single day. So puts me very much into perspective.
Do you still put yourself, I mean, other than, of course, these cycling expeditions that are sort of 10,000 kilometers way up into the mountains and so on, which are dangerous in themselves, but do you still put yourself in as dangerous situations as you did maybe 10 years ago when you worked for the Red Cross? Do you put yourself in those such situations as much? Because no doubt, whilst you probably still find them exciting, you leave people behind who probably worry a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the worry is always, you can imagine my poor mom. I mean, all her life she had a hard time with me. It's like, she had many sleepless nights. But I think it's also a question of trust. And I think people always trusted me a lot. I don't do things mindless. Whatever I do, I think a lot about how I do things. But these days, I mean, I don't move too much in war zones anymore. Although I was recently in refugee camps on the Syrian border. But these days, and since more than 20 years, I paraglide mountains in Switzerland.
Which is fairly dangerous. I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you see it. I mean, for us here, it's not such an unusual sport, but of course, it is one of the more risky sports. But I love it.
So, what's the plan for the next 5 years then? More extreme sports? Well, what are you going to do? What's on the list? Professionally, also in terms of these extreme sports activities, what's happening?
I think the plan in the next 5 years, in many ways, I mean, what I do these days is, and that's one of the positive parts. I mean, I was lucky. I had so much exposure and experience in the last 20 years that this is something that I bring now to a whole different level, which I bring now to my work, for example, at the World Economic Forum, where I deal with extremely high-level people, influential people. And I think part of my plan is really to communicate the messages also of those people, because I think the important part is to bring, let's say, like the difficulties that the world is facing to everybody's attention, and particularly to decision makers. And I think that's where I see my path going, very much in a collaborative manner. Because as much as all these expeditions were fun for me and were very interesting, I'm moving now into a stage of my life where I feel like it's much more about collaboration and even extending that more. And these expeditions had that. They had a very strong collaborative part. But I also think there's a lot more to be done out there. And I think there's a lot more about bringing the right people together to do the right things and making creating an impact that is even much, much bigger.
If this isn't going too much towards your role at the World Economic Forum, what would you do if you had the power? What would you do to, for example, improve the situation as far as the Syrian refugee crisis is? For example, they're closing the camps in Calais, and adults are being sent in one direction, and some of the children are being allowed into the UK, but it took an awfully long time for that to happen. Maybe you could talk about elements of it.
I can just give you a couple of the stories. I mean, I've lived for 10 years in war zones, and I didn't just work there, I really lived on the front of war. So although I wasn't obviously a direct victim of the war, I understood very well what that actually means on a day-to-day basis and why people at the end have to run away. Yeah. And I feel often really ashamed and sad about what is happening in Europe. Because at the end we talk about a refugee crisis, but if we look at the real numbers, it doesn't add up to anything that all the other countries are facing. You know, countries like Jordan, Turkey, Lebanon, who receive millions of people and have to deal with this situation. And I think, what we have to do has to go much beyond the fact that we just provide services to them. I think we have to provide opportunities, and we have to capacity build people and give them a real chance. Because one of the biggest problems I saw often in refugee camps, for example, is simply boredom, is the fact that people have nothing to do and they feel useless to some extent. And I think it's important that we do create those opportunities. But I find it sad that the debate in Europe should be much more on an objective level, but it has become very emotional, which I find difficult for certain issues because people debate. They debate according to how they feel and not what is actually really going on. And that obviously gives a lot of rise to populism and a lot of rise to people who try to cater for those feelings. But does it really solve the problem? Because at the end, I think we have to be realistic. If we look at the situation as it is today, who knows how it's going to be in 5 years? It might be much, much worse than it is today. So is that the answer? Is that our answer, just to make us a big fortress and close us off?
Outside the Schwab Foundation and the World Economic Forum, your role there, do you do any mentoring? Are you mentoring anybody at the moment?
Yes, I do mentor 2 people at the moment. It goes a little bit on and off because certain people come and go in terms of the mentoring. But I feel it's interesting. I still feel really young. It's not like, I just turned 40, but sometimes I feel like I'm still 25. But I know what it means to have had good mentors because I was very, very lucky and blessed. And this is a strong encouragement to anybody who hears this, is look for mentors. And most people are happy to be mentored because when I was 24, I had some of the most incredible mentors who literally changed my life.
Could you tell us about them?
Just one example. When I picked the cause of leprosy for Bite for Help, I was put in touch with the former German ambassador to India called Gerhard Fischer. And Gerhard Fischer was a man in his late 80s, incredibly accomplished, super intelligent. But what he did is once he retired from his diplomatic career, he basically dedicated his life to the cause of leprosy. So he would spend half of the year just in leprosy clinics. He did incredible things, unbelievable. The clinics he built, the centers, the policy change that he affected, so many things. But he really taught me about a few things, and he helped me to understand that it's important you do help other people, but first and foremost, you always also have to think about yourself and how you can move on. So one, he encouraged me to really take up a more professional role in all that. And two, he was really someone, I mean, what do I think as a 24-year-old? I see this, in a way, most people would say this old man who really just spent people who need his help. And I think that in itself is a very strong message, to say, hey, I have a responsibility too. If he can do that, I mean, I can do it 5 times more, And it was a major life-changing experience for me. I often think back and I miss him. He's passed away now 10 years ago. And I often miss his advice. He was a tough teacher. He was very tough with me. But he was tough in a fatherly and gentle way with me.
And any of his family members still alive? Are you in contact with them?
Yes, I do keep contact with his family members, and they're still alive. But it's also like they're living a very, very different life from his life, and it's also interesting to see, how one generation affects another, and one person as he was affects also his own children. But they're lovely, all of them, and I'm still in touch with them.
There's a final question. First of all, are you interested in encouraging other people to participate in any of your future expeditions? As it seems to be quite solitary. You set off for your run or your walk or your bicycle ride, or is it deliberately on your own because that forces you to speak to people more on the way? Do you want to encourage participation in that?
There's two sides to that. The participation always comes, yeah? And I give you a couple of examples. All along the way of Bike for Help, I would be followed and cycled sometimes for days with other people. But the solitary part is also an interesting one because often it's nice to have real quality time with yourself. And every expedition for me is a big learning curve as well. And then you're never alone at the same time. There's all the time you meet people. The bigger the group, of course, the less the contact with the locals. And very often that's for me, one of the most beautiful parts, just to have that openness. But it's always, I think, if I would do it again, and for my next expedition, I think I would definitely look into doing this in a bigger group and see how I can set that up. Because at the end, I want to share these experiences, and I don't want just to do that through video or through writing or whatever. Because I think, like most things in life, I mean, what really changed my life was the simple fact that I experienced things. This is like I could talk to you about refugees, and I may have never seen a refugee in my life. I've never talked to one, and I've never been in war. I may be able to talk about this, but is that really grounded in an experience? And that, I think, makes the major difference. But that also requires that you do that with people who are brave enough to say, yeah, I'm going to do that. Because, I mean, find somebody who cycles months and months with you through deserts and things and doesn't complain. You have to have a good team. I mean, people have to be pretty rock solid to do this kind of stuff. Because it doesn't help. I mean, if I'm the whole day fighting 80 kilometers per hour winds in the desert in Iran, it doesn't help if you start complaining. What you have to do is just to fight it, and get through it. Yeah. And that's the important part. And for this, you need team members that are strong. And maybe at this point, I can mention, I was recently asked to do a video for a beautiful campaign, which is called Today I Am Brave. And it's a campaign of 1-minute videos where people actually speak all kinds of challenges. I mean, I was obviously asked to speak about my extreme expeditions, but what kind of challenges people have gone through. I know that there's a woman with breast cancer on it, and there were so many different types of challenges people go through. And I really feel like this is inspiration. I think I've done stuff, but I mean, there's everybody else who has done a million other amazing things. And people need to hear these stories because, again, it puts ourselves into perspectives and what we do.
One of your big missions in life is to try to encourage other people to take advantage of their skills, to share them with people in need. As a last message to those people, what would you like to say?
I mean, always think like that. Most of the things that we do in life and most of our passions, we like them. That's why we're passionate about them. But I think also that is a gift that can be shared. And I think that's the beauty of it. And I felt whenever I was able to share a passion with others and helping others with that, it just made me a really happy person. And I really think that is my message is, I mean, think about all the skills and ideas and passions that you have and see how you can translate them into something that serves something bigger than yourself. Think about all what really makes you wake up in the morning and where you think, wow, I love that. And how it can make a difference to others who just maybe don't have that skill, don't know how to use that skill, or who really would like to learn that skill. And I think that's the beauty of it, and that really creates happiness.
Christoph von Toggenburg, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Andrea. More than welcome. Yeah?
You're
and thank you
welcome.
for the great question and super research. I'm really impressed all the things
thank
that
you
know.
You take care then. Have a nice evening.
You too. Take care.
Bye, Christoph.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Take care.